Good afternoon, everybody. I hope we won't bore you too much, and hopefully we'll wake you up for the last session. The topic that we've been asked to talk about is tourism in the Mediterranean and how it can play a role in invigorating and developing growth. And I think that over the past 24 hours, as we've sat here and listened to many speakers, we've heard many issues coming forth about the state of Europe, North and South, the UK, development, the financial crisis, etc. All very important issues. However, from my perspective, as I sit here today, as the CEO of one of the cruise companies in Europe, which is essentially a local company, a Greek company, I think it's important that we bring some reality to the discussion and try to give you a perspective of how we need to face the daily pressures that are brought to bear upon us as we seek to navigate all these myriads of rules that the EU brings upon us, and how we try and create an environment which is conducive to growth and which actually develops business. Let me first start off by saying the Mediterranean is indeed the richest area in the world, both culturally and from natural diversity. Therefore, in the context of sea tourism, it is indeed the most important area and could be the single most important area for cruising and sea tourism. Why? Because other than the fact that it has all these interesting places to go, from a cost perspective, the Mediterranean gives the opportunity of many, many destinations in short distances. Therefore, for the cruise industry, the Mediterranean should naturally be the first and foremost area of doing business. However, as we've just heard from the minister earlier on, he stated that Europe and the Mediterranean is second after the Caribbean. And one has to sit and ask, why is that? Let me possibly provide you 4 key issues that I believe are impediments to the growth of sea tourism in the Mediterranean. The first one, there is a complete lack of pan-European dialogue between stakeholders and operators and the people that promulgate policies. It is as if we live in a vacuum and we have to be the receptors of decisions that are made by people who sit either in Brussels and who do not know the reality of day-to-day business. That's number one. And how does that manifest itself? By the simple example of the visas, which you said. The visa is not only a simple issue of issuing visas. There is actually an economic dimension to it. Let me explain myself. Cruises are essentially broken down into 2 types of people that go to cruises. There are people that will choose to go on a cruise for a short holiday, and there are those people who come from far away and do a lifetime experience of coming to Europe. But those people that choose to go on a long cruise from faraway countries, by definition, are the ones that require a visa. And by definition, because they make a once-in-a-lifetime holiday, they spend more. So therefore, there is an economic incentive for us as Europe to facilitate those particular people to get a visa much easier than what it is today. It's not only a matter of the BRICS or Mint and the Chinese and Russians have more money. It is the fact that an Australian who comes all the way over to Europe will need to come and see many, many countries. And all those countries are not necessarily in Europe. The cruising business, in fact, has multiple ports which goes in and out of Europe. Therefore, the visa that we require to issue is not a single entry visa, it's a multiple entry visa. If you look at the cost of that multiple entry visa, both in time and in money, it actually becomes a disincentive for people to come and visit us. So there's a prime example. A second example, we need to ensure that the cruise industry remains competitive. What do I mean by that? If you look at the cruise industry, it is dominated by large multinational cruise companies. They have the choice of taking the vessel, because it's a mobile, and taking it to an area which is more conducive to business and more conducive to driving profit. So, when the EU decides to improve its green credentials and makes a very, very correct decision that it needs to have low sulfur fuel introduced, it also needs to take into consideration other areas in the world, and when are they promulgating those particular laws, so that we are in sync. If the EU imposes these conditions on the cruise industry now, and a Singapore or a China or an Australia do it 5 years later on, for the next 5 years we will be uncompetitive. And therefore it is much easier for a company like the Carnival Corporation or Royal Caribbean to decide to reduce the number of vessels that deploy in this part of the world and move them somewhere else. And what does that mean? It means that all the European countries in the Mediterranean have fewer passengers that can be attracted, and therefore our economies suffer. A third area, port facilities. The EU has made laws that basically say we need to improve waste management. And therefore, it says that each and every single port must have waste management facilities. I dare you to go and have a look at how many ports actually have those waste management facilities. And the net result of that is that there is a huge cost for the cruise industry, because we are forced to continue carrying our garbage around, which basically means more fuel costs because it's heavier, until such time that we do find a port that we can go and get rid of the waste in the way that it is promulgated. Why am I saying that? Essentially, you can make those laws, but you have to think practically and pragmatically as to how you put them into force. Finally, we've spoken about connectivity. It is correct that connectivity is most important in terms of getting air access, etc. But there's another dimension. It is not only connectivity from faraway lands. It is connectivity at the points of destination. When we go to a port, the revenue that we derive for each and every single country where we derive is dependent on the number of excursions that we can take passengers to. And if those destinations do not have the right infrastructure in terms of transport, road transport, etc., then the passenger leaves with not such a good experience, and in fact he doesn't spend as much. So therefore, the EU should really be looking at how it can invest not only in infrastructure at the port level, but in all those little destinations that make up and broaden the economic activity beyond the normal big ports. The Mediterranean is full of destinations, full of history. We need EU policy. We need the EU to consider really working in partnership with the key stakeholders and the operators. And I welcome the fact that we are here in Malta, because Malta has indeed shown how, by working very closely with private investment, with private companies, you can make a difference. I'll give you an example. I heard this morning that Transport Malta will be issuing seafarers' documents in a few months. And this is a particularly important improvement for the cruise industry, because it basically says that our crew, which is, by the way, 6.1 million seafarers deploy in Europe on an annual basis, those 6.1 million seafarers spend in excess of 130 million euros, and they do it with very, very short hourly stays. Can you imagine now, by Transport Malta starting to issue those seafarers' books, how that opens up the economy to more spending? I mean, there is a practical solution that you brought, and I suggest that Malta take on board these points that I had and become the catalyst within the EU to start bringing sense and pragmatism to this business. Thank you for your attention.